So there's a new Planet of the Apes movie coming out, and not long ago, for the hell of it, I watched the original films, and I was just so impressed with how well they held up and how much I enjoyed them. So I figured that this would be a great time to do a dead last on the series and rank everything up, comparing the old ones to the new ones. And lo and behold, they're great too. In fact, there's very little in this franchise that isn't genuine gold. So I sent the roster of films out, and it's the 5 films from the classic run, the Tim Burton remake or reboot or whatever they called that, and the new trilogy. And I sent out that list to my patrons, and these are the participants this time around. 41 people sent in their lists, and they put their favorite film in number 1, which got it 1 point, their second favorite at number 2, which gets 2 points, and so on down the list until they put their least favorite in dead last. Here worth 9 points since we had 9 movies. That means that the best possible score that a movie could have would be 41 if every single person put the same movie at number 1. And the worst score would be 369 points if everyone put the same movie in dead last. So 41 people times 9, and that's 369. But let's stop monkeying around and get to the list. Coming in dead last, I have to tell you, this may have been the closest that we've had to the worst score in a while, and with a whopping 347 out of 369 points. We're looking at the Tim Burton 2001 Planet of the Apes remake. This one was put in dead last 28 times. So 68% of the lists had it in last place. But it had a ton of 8s as well. And the highest score that it managed was 5th place, which it got twice. And I was one of those that had this in dead last. And I'm just going to come right out and say it. This is a list of movies that I love. I think the Planet of the Apes franchise is pretty underrated in terms of overall quality. Every single movie on here is one that I think is great and I would rewatch in a heartbeat. Except this one. This one is terrible. And what's really weird is that this was Tim Burton coming off of a number of very Tim Burton-y things. The streak before this movie was Batman Returns, then Ed Wood, then Mars Attacks, then Sleepy Hollow, and then this. And it's just so like generic looking for the most part. I generally think if you had a person who was unaware of its existence and then you showed them this without seeing the credits and afterwards were like, who directed this film? They would never, ever say Tim Burton. And what's weird is how small it all looks, even though I know this had a monster budget. Like the original film had the humans chased in the field with these big sweeping shots of the apes after them. And that scene here just feels like it's all in close up and it just seems like it's on a backlot soundstage. Like sure, they eventually get to a more open area and that part looks bigger, but the scope already felt narrowed. And a big part of the problem of the whole movie is that Marky Mark just does not pull off this sort of action hero. But this was a period where it seemed like they kept trying to give him these types of roles, but he just does not really fit this type. He's not beefy enough to pull off the whole buff action man thing, but also didn't have the emotional range to do the whole sensitive hero type thing, and just comes off as blank. The makeup is a standout though, and the performances were pretty nice for the apes, even if it's a touch like inconsistent. I don't know whatever Helena Bonham Carter's ape type was supposed to be, but it did not translate, and she looked more like Michael Jackson than anything else. I do like that they went a different direction and had the apes be an offshoot of the experiment apes from the beginning, although that sort of tosses aside like the whole social commentary of the originals, which is another problem. Part of the reason the first one stood the test of time is that it was saying something. And the series' message only got more overt as it went on. And then you get here, and your film eliminates all of that and goes the route of a standard action movie with nothing really to say. And it just becomes forgettable.
Damn them. Damn them all to hell.
Now, this may be one of the biggest gaps between Dead Last and the runner up that we've ever seen, because our number 8 movie, with 268 points, a drop of about 80, we have Battle for the Planet of the Apes. This one did get put into Dead Last 4 times, 10% of the lists, but it was also ranked in first 1 time. And I had this one right where it landed, since I also had this one at 8. But I should clarify, going back to what I said before, I think this movie is really enjoyable, and I like watching it. I don't think it's quite as poignant and compelling as the ones before it, but it's still a really solid film. But I guess the issue here is that they had to follow up Conquest, which is a really heavy film and sets the franchise on its ear. And instead, they stripped it back and went for a more, I don't know, TV series feeling. Like, what I like about it is that it's showing that bridge, that gap in between the time that humans ruled and when they were essentially just cattle, and that transitioning of their roles in society. And even though I feel like it could have gone a bit deeper into that, this is really the only film that gives you that until something like Dawn or War comes around in a newer series. And here's the thing. I think that when you say Planet of the Apes, what comes to mind for most people is cheesy movies. I think that the general consensus is that they're campy, silly films. And honestly, watching Escape or Conquest or the ending of Beneath, I have no idea what they're talking about, because this series is bleak, nihilistic, and very heavy. And then you have Battle, which is just this campy, silly film, just sitting at the end of the original series, coming off as a more lightweight coda. But that doesn't mean it's not a good film. I still really like this one. The fight scene between Aldo and Caesar is great, and something you're not getting from any of the other films. Most of the series is involved with humans versus apes, and I like that this one leans harder into the ape versus ape. And those that want to care about humans versus those that don't. And what's wild is that the new series seems to have taken more inspiration from this than anything else. Sure, I wish that this one strived to be something more and pushed the envelope like its predecessors did, but it still delivers enough good stuff to make it worth watching.
Ape has killed ape. Ape has killed ape. Ape has killed ape. Ape has killed ape. Ape has killed ape.
Let's go down to our number 7 film now, and this was another decent drop down, because with 227, around 40 points lower than Battle, we have our first entry from the new series, War for the Planet of the Apes. And this one did get put in the dead last spot 3 times, 7% of the list, and was also put in first place once. And I have this one a bit higher than this, since I put this in 5th place. And this is one that I really like, but I also have some problems with. Like, first off, technically, this is miles away from the last one. The apes just look so much better here, even though I thought that they looked pretty solid there. But here, it just all looks so much more real. I'm generally not really a fan of fully CG characters, and they're frequently distracting, especially as technology progresses and you look back at the earlier examples and they just look so glaringly not there. And even though it feels like a natural extension of the last one, for some reason I felt like it was just going over some of the same grounds. And I always want to like this one more than I do. And I think it's because the last movie changed the game so much from the first film and did something so different with the story that I was hoping for something along those lines here. But instead, it just feels too similar. Like, the difference between Rise and Dawn feels like so much has happened, and the world is so different, and you're seeing these characters deal with all of these changed situations. But then between Dawn and War, the changes are so slight, and it feels like just more of that one. So as a trilogy, it feels disjointed because it makes the first film feel on its own. I also feel like the human characters are perhaps a little too over the top villains. Like Dawn painted the opposition, even Koba, with shades of gray, and gave you a number of well rounded motivations and had a more nuanced take on it all versus the more handheld tactic here. Like, sure, they did give the Colonel some good background stuff, but he's still a little evil for evil's sake. Like, Woody Harrelson just strolls in and may as well be wearing a big t shirt that just says, "I'm the bad guy" on it. But the thing that pushes it up there for me is the emotional impact in Caesar's arc. The fact that I grew to care so damn much about something that I just complained didn't even exist is something to say. And knowing that this is the culmination of the journey that you've been on with this character for 3 movies now, they really stuck the landing.
Oh no! Oh no! No, no! No, no, no! Okay.
Heading on down to our number 6 movie, and this was a lot closer of a battle because only 3 points separated it. And right before the final ranking came in, this was a tie. So that last list decided that number 6, with 224 points, is Beneath the Planet of the Apes. This one did get 2 dead lasts, 5% of the lists, and the best score that it got was second place, which it got 6 times. And I had this one a touch lower, a little lower than when it ended up, because I had this one in 7th place. But again, I feel the need to state that I love this one. It's a really good film, but it's also a pretty flawed one. Most of my issues with this one tend to revolve around the first hour or so, as the movie just kind of plays out as a near remake of the first one. You have a rocket ship crash landing, again, and a lone man enters ape territory, again, and he looks exactly like the last guy who did this, and everything just feels way too familiar. I mean, Brent is a little less abrasive than Taylor is, but he's also a hell of a lot blander and less interesting. It also loses a bit of points for being the only film of the original run to not have Roddy McDowall. And yeah, movie, I noticed. Granted, it was because he was busy in another country directing a film, so it's not exactly like the movie's fault, but the replacement Cornelius just isn't the same. But where this one picks up is the final act, when Brent and Nova reach the Forbidden Zone, and this movie just goes completely off the rails in the best way possible. And I'm gonna talk about the very ending here, so apologies for spoilers for this 50-plus-year-old movie, but there's no way that any film would allow their big popcorn film to end this way. I don't know, maybe Terminator 3, but this film ends with every single one of the main characters being killed, and then a bomb going off that destroys the entire planet and everyone on it. Like, nice going, Taylor. Sure, you sure did show those apes who had the last laugh, but hey, dude, remember all those innocent humans that they had back at their camp? Remember the really nice apes who helped you out and then took care of you? I guess screw them, right? But yeah, what a gutsy and bold way to end it. It's essentially a filmmaker's method of saying, there, try to continue this franchise now, suckers. And it was glorious. And what's funny is that the bomb was a suggestion of Heston's, and he didn't even want to appear in this one. But they lured him in with the promise that his paycheck would go to charity and his character would be killed off. And the head of 20th Century Fox, Richard Zanuck, thought it would be a good idea to end the whole series with that bomb idea. However, during filming, Zanuck was fired, and the new producers were already cooking up ideas to do a third one. Bomb or no bomb. But, all in all, this is a really good time, even if it takes some time to get to it. This list is a little shorter than most since there's only 9 films, so our number 5 is dead center. There's 4 before it and 4 after. So, In our dead center, with 198 points, we have Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. This is the first film on the list to not get a dead last vote, and the worst score it got was 8th place, which it did get 4 times. But it also took the first place spot twice for 5% of the lists. And I had this one a skosh higher than the rest, since I put this one in 4th place. And holy crap, is this one great. If there's anyone that thinks that Apes movies are just camp entertainment, throw this one on and just watch them be confused. And I know that people get riled up every time I say this, but this movie is yet another example that films have always had political messages, and people push back on that, and they're like, yeah, but today's movies are only the message and not subtle like older movies. And those people have no idea what they're talking about, because this movie is only political metaphor. There's no subtext to this, it's only text. It was such an obvious metaphor for race relations in the civil rights movement, and the ending inspired by the Watts riots of 65, that when they showed the original ending, where the apes ended up killing their human captors to test audiences, they had people walk out and tell them that they were too uncomfortable with what was being shown. So they actually changed the ending, but didn't really have the means, which is why most of it is done with that weird close up of Caesar's eyes. But even if the concept that this film appears to be about race relations isn't entirely obvious from the general content, it was acknowledged by the screenwriter. So it's not even an example of someone saying, you're reading too much into it. But yeah, this whole movie is a political statement, and it's a damn powerful one at that. But beyond that, it's a really good film. McDowell brings a ton of pathos to his character and handles the transition from meek and timid slave to a steadfast leader of a revolution extremely well. And even Ricardo Montalban does a great job here selling his character and proving once again that he is the answer to Quienes Mas Macho. I think if I had to have one direct complaint here, it'd be the runtime, because at a scant 88 minutes, this movie could use a little time to breathe. Everything happens so fast and at breakneck speeds. I wish that there was some additional scenes to flesh some of the things out a little bit, to boost up the emotional impact. But it's also cool that this is the film that Rise of the Planet of the Apes took so much from in terms of the ending. We are now headed up into the top half of the roster, and there was a decent jump up of around 20 points here. And hey, speaking about being inspired from Conquest, we have Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the first of the new series. It was actually put in dead last twice, 5% of the time, but was also ranked in the first place 5 times, 12% of the list. And I had this one a little lower, since it was my 6th place entry. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I should say that I think this movie is really damn good. And putting it in 6th place out of 9 isn't a sign of its lack of quality, and more about how freaking awesome that the 5 I put above it are. And this movie exists in this really weird space, because you can't call it a remake, but it's not a prequel either. It's squarely in the whole reboot category, since it's taking that original concept and spinning it into something very different. I remember when Burton's version came out, they were very intent on not calling it a remake and saying it was a reimagining. But let's face it, that movie was basically a remake. But that whole reimagining idea actually does seem to fit this. It's taking the ideas of the original franchise and sort of retelling them, but taking a square one approach to it and viewing it from a very different lens. But it's really doubling down on the character elements, which I think is great. And there's some truly heart-tugging moments going on. Christy actually won't watch this one ever again, because she said it made her too sad. But there's a couple of things that I think hold it back a bit. And one of them is James Franco, who's just not pulling this off at all. He's as miscast here as Wahlberg was, although the movie's not as dependent on him as that one was. So it's a little less glaringly obvious. It's just when you say brilliant but very caring scientific genius, let's just say that Franco is not even close to who I envision. But what's funny about his character is that number one, after a certain point, he's entirely superfluous. Like there's a turn in the film where you could just never go back to his character again, and it's all the same. And then number two, he's essentially mostly responsible for killing almost everyone on Earth, and the movie just sort of glosses over that. The other thing is the slightly dated CG, even though it still looks quite good. It was great at the time, and it still looks fine. But it's also very clear that it's not an actual ape here and is a digital character. And as hard as I try, I can't not notice that. Also, the attention to the callbacks to the original are plentiful, and they're worked in really well, from Bright Eyes to Madhouse to the missing spaceship. And let me just say right now that I would love for them to pay that off and have those astronauts show back up in one of the new entries.
Caesar is home.
Here we go into the top three, and this one was very close since only a single point separated it from Rise. And this is another example that every single ranking counts, because this was in fourth place. And then the final list that was sent in favored this one over Rise and put it into third. And so thanks, Heather. And with 176 points, we have Escape from the Planet of the Apes. This did get 2 dead lasts, another 5%, but it was also put into first place 3 times for 7% of the rankings. And I also had this one in third place. And can you imagine that you're tasked with doing a follow-up to Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and you get hired to write a third part, and they're like, oh yeah, every single character is dead and the entire Earth is destroyed. Good luck! So, like, the only thing that really makes sense is doing a prequel. But they found a way to do both. They do a prequel and a continuation at the same time. And even if the logistics of it are basically just sort of hand waved, it's absolutely the best way they could have gone. And even though the first 2 films were definitely layered with commentary and played into the whole animal rights metaphor more than anything else, this is the one where they just went full bore with making the stories about social issues and satire. And the best part about this one is really getting to flesh out the ape characters of Zira and Cornelius. They were some of the best parts of the original too, and letting them shine here, especially with a returning McDowell, was a huge benefit. And what's funny is that it's pretty easy to sort of gloss over Zira, but Kim Hunter was a hell of an actress. She had a freaking Oscar for Streetcar, and she's great here as well. It gives the role of ape woman from the future a ton of nuance. And what's really nuts is then they were like, oh man, the ending of that last one was really depressing, wasn't it? Man, they just killed everyone, didn't they? Wouldn't it be a shame if we did that again? But it's a lot more emotional here and way more devastating. I know that it's not the same to compare a finale where a couple of important characters die to one where literally everyone on the planet blows up, but this has way more of an impact and it's just gut-wrenching. Again, I'm spoiling a really old movie here, but the scene where Zira, on her last legs, places her dead child into the water and lets it drift off, it's a tough one. But then that last moment as she makes sure to die huddled up with her love is just so sad and so human. Like what an Onion moment. And and yeah, if you were ever wondering how they managed to get back in time in the first place, well, the answer is I guess Captain Kirk. Yeah, that's right. There's a comic book series that's a crossover with Star Trek and the Apes, and which places the Enterprise in the alternate Apes universe. And they find Cordy and Zira adrift in space in Brent's ship and assist them in getting back through time. Only 2 left now, and we're down to 1 classic and 1 new entry. But who will win the day? Well, our runner-up in second place with 161 points, we have Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. This one was never in dead last, but it did get 1 8th place vote, and it was put in first place 3 times for 7% of the rankings. And I also had this one right where it was, since this was also my second place entry. And this is great because it's sort of diving back into the aspects of the original, in that you have this society of apes that have been on their own and are now dealing with the intrusion of humans again. The only thing that you really lose is the commentary on animal testing that the original had, but this becomes its own metaphor. And I love how this series has moved away from being something that could have been a mindless action film and instead became a more personal and quiet story. As opposed to being this clear metaphor for race relations, it's instead become more about fatherhood and the perils of war. And even though I was really into the satirical elements of the original films and what they were doing there, I also really connected with the emotional core that this one is presenting. In the end, even though half of the cast are apes, this movie is all about humanity and how it survives. And I'm not sure if the CGI has dramatically improved or if it's just because it's set against the wilderness as opposed to modern buildings, but it's not as distracting here. It became a lot easier to simply accept these characters as real things in their world. And again, I credit that towards the environment being less of something that we're used to seeing every day. A CG character in a bedroom or an office is grounded and easier to feel like it stands out. But in this jungle backdrop, they feel more natural and simply a part of this world. It's also kind of wild how disconnected from the first one this one is. With the exception of the window imagery and a return to the house for one scene, there's really not much to connect with the first film except for the apes. And they're now existing in this entirely new world. And I know I mentioned this in the war comments, but that's sort of, this is something entirely different than the last one, and we're redefining the series yet again, is what I appreciate about it. They all feel connected and yet are constantly giving you something new. And I think that that's what brought some of those others down when they were just retreading something from an earlier entry, because that's not really what these movies do.
That's good, huh? Yeah, that's good. Hey, okay, all right. Easy. Yeah. Easy. Easy.
And that takes us to our number one spot, the top of the heap of this group of genuinely quality films, and our numero uno, with a mere 67 points, is the OG Planet of the Apes. This one is the only film here to not be ranked in either dead last or 8th place, and in fact, the worst score that it got was a mere 4th place, which it got 4 times. It was, however, ranked in first place 26 times, 63% of the time, and was put in first almost as many times as its remake was put in dead last. And yep, I was one of those first place spots, and what an overlooked film that this is. Like I said earlier, I think when people think about this franchise and what it stands for, they're picturing goofy costumes and campiness. And in watching this, all of that stems from one thing: Charlton Heston's performance. All of the things that people like to make fun of with this one, and I will agree that those things are a riot, are Heston's overacting. And this man overacts. He's chomping scenery like it's made of Cinnamon Toast Crunch or something. And this man is just going for it. Between
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
and
It's a madhouse! A madhouse!
and of course,
You maniacs! You blew it up! Oh, damn you!
he's just sort of going over the top, like Stallone's thumb. And even though I think that it sort of taints how people look at this film, seeing it as a goofy camp spectacle instead of the cool sci-fi film with a genuine message, I still think it tends to steal the show. How can you be mad at the man when it seems like he's having such a damn good time? But you know what I find funny about this movie, in a sign of the times? This movie's rated G, like general audience G, like approved for all little kids, and it's giving you naked man butt very slight balls, apes getting shot, some surgery, and I love it. Like old school MPAA wasn't a bunch of Puritans like today. And it's interesting because, as we've said, the later films clearly went into a territory of discussing racial tensions of the times. And that was also true with this one, but it can also be interpreted as a statement on animal cruelty as well and animal testing. But then, of course, we have to discuss that ending since it's become such a massively iconic moment. It's hard to believe that moment was once one of the most shocking twist endings in all of cinema. And that aspect was brought into the script by none other than Rod Serling. The book ending is much different and takes place on another world. And it was Serling that brought in the idea that they were still on Earth, just in the far future. And yeah, this is a great movie with a lot to say. And some of the things that are said are shouted pretty wildly by Heston. But it's pretty clear why this ended up at the top of the list. And since it was my number one as well, I'm glad that it landed here.
Many days and nights?
So there you have it, 9 different movies with monkeys, or apes, I guess. And yeah, I'm really happy with where all of this landed up. Let's take a look at the list. And clearly, I'm pretty pleased with this, considering that the top 3 is exactly the same as mine, and the bottom 2 are also the same as mine. Some of the things in the middle are a little bit different than where I had them, but I have no problems with where they are. This looks pretty good to me. Let me know what you think of this down below. I want to hear your comments about how you would place these. Put that down below. Let me know if you agree with these as well too. Tell me that. I'd like to hear it. And also keep in mind you can participate in these rankings. We do them every single month on my Patreon at patreon.com/movie timelines. Every single month you are invited to rank up a different list of movies. We're working on something really fun right now, so you can do that as well too. And you can do it for as little as $1 per month. It's pretty simple. But yeah, go ahead and do that. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you like what you see on the channel, hit that subscribe. Go to that Patreon page, and we'll see you very shortly for another great video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.